that jacket, don't look back. Look what's coming on down this track. Ring a bell or two, it's so old it's new. Turn around. You and you had big things to do. Gonna change this world here before we're through. We gonna right them wrongs, sing them freedom songs till freedom's won. Now I lay me down to rest. I dream of friends that I love best. The good they done is all that remains. Not a stone left to their name. But I think of those that gave their all, and I wake at the mirror of the world, and I drink to those who aim to remain undone.
The fourth and fifth program in this series is my interview with attorney Nancy Burton, activist and leader of the Anti-Millstone Coalition, a woman of great conviction and determination, to whom we in Connecticut owe a great debt of appreciation. I'm L.A. Steele. Tonight we're in Mystic, Connecticut at the Anti-Millstone Coalition, and we are here with the attorney for the coalition, Nancy Burton, and we're going to ask her a few questions tonight regarding the reopening of the Millstone plant here in where is it, Waterford, or is it in Waterford?
Waterford, yes.
It's exactly Waterford, yeah. Explain to us when you began this, and what I'd like to discuss tonight is some of the victories you've had and some of the defeats, and what's happening now that they're trying to reopen this plant under new management.
Right. Well, we are being in Mystic 10 miles downwind of the Millstone nuclear reactors. They're located in Waterford, Connecticut. There are 3 reactors. The oldest one that was built in 1970 has been permanently shut. It's being decommissioned. But the units 2 and 3, which came along later, are operating at full power or close to it. Actually, as we're speaking, Unit 2 has suffered a sudden shutdown with some system failure, but it is probably being brought up to power. The entire station was closed by operation of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is based in Washington, in 1996, right. Through the revelations of whistleblowers that there were safety issues which were terribly serious that had been overlooked by the NRC, which was supposed to be the watchdog guardian agency protecting the public health and safety. Clearly they hadn't been, and plant employees felt compelled finally to bring these issues to the public because they were being ignored by the plant operators and ultimately by the NRC. Well, the disclosures were so shocking that the NRC was moved to shut the entire station down. It was unprecedented, and all 3 reactors were shut for a period of 2 years. And at the same time in Connecticut, Connecticut's 4th reactor, which is located not so far from here, about 30 miles in East Haddam, that plant was being shut down and decommissioned. So there was a period of time of 2 years recently in Connecticut when its entire fleet of nuclear reactors was shut down and was not operating. And yet, lo and behold, during that entire period, we didn't suffer a single blackout or brownout, or there was no shortage of electricity. But yet, there's been a lot of pressure to revive the nuclear reactors, and today Connecticut still has units at Millstone, units 2 and 3 operating. The Connecticut Coalition Against Millstone, which is based here at 13 Water Street in Mystic, got underway back in October of 1999 over an issue that involved spent fuel storage at Millstone. We are an organization that is trying to bring about the permanent closure of Millstone for reasons that have to do with health and safety and also economics. We are aware of high cancer incidences in the area right around Millstone. There have been cancer clusters identified along the populations that are the shore communities.
And these are attributable to, have they been attributed to the emissions from radiation from the plants? Are there any studies on that yet?
You will find that the owners and operators of Millstone deny any complicity. You will find that the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission denies any complicity. But you will also find that there are pioneering scientists out there who have linked the types of radioactive discharges to certain kinds of cancers that aren't caused other ways. For instance, strontium-90 and its link to bone cancer. Strontium-90 is an emission from Millstone. There are other radioisotopes, cesium-137, and a whole host of others that are particularly linked with the kinds of cancers that in this area are elevated in comparison with other areas in the state, such as skin cancers, and also childhood leukemia is higher here than elsewhere.
What has been the medical community's outreach to you, or what has been their what have they done? Have they said anything, written anything about these? I mean, is there any outcry from the medical community in Connecticut about this?
Well, we do know that the local hospital in New London, the Lawrence and Memorial Hospital, recently, within the past few years, opened a community cancer center, which it didn't have before Millstone operated, and it's been so successful in terms of the number of people it has treated that it has undergone expansions during the recent period of time. We hear anecdotally from people who come into our storefront of cancer clusters, discussions with medical physicians, also discussions with veterinarians who see pets come into their offices. And of course the pets, some of them drink from puddles of water which fill up with rainfall. People don't drink from those puddles, but pets do. And when radioisotopes are emitted into the atmosphere, they come down as rainfall. And the radioisotopes collect on the grass. That's why goats and cattle milk are sampled in the area to test for emissions. We know anecdotally that there are tumors in pets in this area, which may be higher than elsewhere, but the state of Connecticut has never done a systematic study and hasn't encouraged anybody to do a systematic study. What we're trying to do is to gather the information that we can, and we're trying to see if we can interest the local communities in a scientific survey of the people who live in the affected areas, and that's one of the tasks that we have ahead of us.
Has there been any political involvement with your group or your organization? We haven't heard anything. I mean, that's why we're doing this show and other shows in this series. We have not heard anything really regarding this, but very, very little. Okay, in the news media, newspapers. What's happened, Nancy? Why has there been such a hush? Okay, regarding something so significant?
There always has been a taboo when you're talking about nukes. And that may be in part because the nuclear energy program grew out of the nuclear war program and the Cold War era and so forth. The Atoms for Peace program in the Eisenhower administration is what gave rise to nuclear power. At that time, it was projected to produce cheap and safe energy, and it hasn't done either one of those. But because there's a relation between nuclear power and nuclear weapons, there's a taboo, there's secrecy, there are concerns about defense that have an interplay here. And also because of federal jurisdiction in the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the states historically have given a hands-off attitude often to nuclear reactors.
But the absurdity, it seems to me, behind this is that we're giving this technology around the world to develop these nuclear reactors. And, I mean, you're using high-grade plutonium. What are the, like for instance, with Millstone, what are the chances, or what kind of, how vulnerable is something like Millstone to a terrorist attack or to theft of these kind of this material?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Millstone has only recently disclosed that it has lost track of some of its highly irradiated spent fuel rods. That is a very, very shocking revelation on their part. They claim that for the past 25 years or so, they've been unable to account for 2 rods at their Millstone 1 reactor. This is unprecedented in the industry, and they have spent the past 6 months doing a record search and doing a video search of their spent fuel pool, and still can't come up with any clues as to where these rods are.
Now, these are spent fuel rods?
These are the most highly radioactive components of a nuclear facility.
God.
And given that 6 months have gone by after this revelation and nobody can account for them, the question has been raised whether they might have fallen into the hands of terrorists. Who can say? When they can't tell us where they could be, and really can't account for their failure to account for them.
God.
So it is pretty scary that we are exporting this technology as fast as we can everywhere around the world. Just as we did after Rachel Carson's disclosures of DDT, put a hold on sales of DDT in this country, but didn't stop the export to other countries all around the world. Right. We are notorious for exporting trouble.
For those of you who saw the previous 3 shows with Joe Besade, you're probably a little more knowledgeable than you were, but Joe brought to light some serious indictments against the unions that were involved, the construction of this, the types of collusion and horrible things that were going on in developing this. How safe are we with this? I mean, now that they've lost rods, that, you know, we're telling possible. I mean, there was one case you mentioned about nails in nails in these funnels and leaks and possibly, God knows, you know, it just seems unlimited the problems that could arise, and the callous and careless nature of how these places are operated. What you must live daily in fear, and these people around here really must be in fear. Those who know. Is there any way that why haven't the politicians, why haven't the governor, why hasn't somebody seriously looked at these allegations? It doesn't seem like anyone has.
Well, not to the extent that we would hope that they might have. However, they haven't been completely looked at, and it's really because of the whistleblowers, again, that we know a good deal about what we know about what has gone on there that's been very, very wrong. In fact, it was through the revelations of a chemistry technician at Millstone by the name of Jim Plum that development of the information that he provided led to federal charges, felony charges under both the Atomic Energy Act and the Clean Water Act that Northeast Utilities pleaded guilty to in September of 2000. To give you some idea of what was involved here, when you choose to take a ride in an airplane, most people today don't think twice, if it's a domestic airline, that their pilot will be fully qualified to operate the plane. You don't think about
Right.
that. And that's because there are certification standards that are federal that require pilots to study, take exams, and pass them before they're allowed to fly airplanes. Well, the same kinds of standards apply at nuclear reactors. You can't have your operators licensed to operate them without being sure that they go through appropriate training and that they take tests and that they pass the tests. However, what came out during disclosures in the recent years was that Northeast Utilities knowingly falsified operator training records. In other words, trainers didn't pass the tests, but nevertheless NU falsely certified to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission that the operators had passed and they were therefore licensed to operate Millstone. We only know that not because NU volunteered the information or because the NRC is properly regulating the company. It's because of the disclosures made necessary by whistleblowers because nobody within the company or within the government was paying any heed to these calls.
Yeah, it's absolutely staggering, frightening. We have a map behind us, and if you can focus in on this, it says, what if Chernobyl happened in Connecticut? Now, Nancy, I'm going to ask you, please, to explain this map. For the viewers, the little that I know about this, that target area that you see is here where we are right now, where Millstone is. Now, explain what could happen if Chernobyl happened here, right? Or if a leak, say like 3 Mile Island, would happen here, and what are the odds that it might?
Well, those are very good questions that you ask. First of all, the question, could a Chernobyl accident happen here? The short answer is that an accident could happen here, but not exactly the same, because the Chernobyl reactor is different in design from the Millstone reactors and American reactors. The Chernobyl reactor didn't have a containment, a dome, a concrete dome covering it, as American reactors do and Millstone does. However, as serious and severe as the Chernobyl accident was 15 years ago, and we're only now really beginning to see the full effect of it as we see children being born today with horrible diseases. As serious and severe as the Chernobyl accident was 15 years ago in Russia, the same level of seriousness could result here if there were an accident at Millstone. It wouldn't be just the same accident because the Millstone reactors have concrete containments over their reactors, which would tend to temper the effects if the same kind of accident occurred. However, the Millstone reactors have spent fuel pools where they have stored on site all of their highly radioactive waste over 30 years now, and there is no containment over the spent fuel pools. Now, there are accidents which all scientists have postulated as being possible in a spent fuel pool, such as at Millstone. And it doesn't involve anything that you'd have to strain the imagination to come up with. It could involve something as simple as not positioning valves properly, allowing for leakage of water in these pools. When the spent fuel rods are immersed underwater, their radiation is fairly completely shielded from exposure, but if the water drains away, they're very dangerous. And there have been accidents at Millstone involving improper drainage of the water.
Have these been reported, Nancy? Any of these reported?
These have been reported after the fact, and in fact there was it was a very shocking disclosure that Northeast Utilities was forced to admit, which was that the leakage from its spent fuel pool continued for a long period of time, and the company wasn't able to address it right away. If the circumstances are set up just right, you could have a catastrophic accident from the spent fuel pools, any one of the 3 of them at Millstone, which would be far worse than the Chernobyl accident because of the amount of radiation that is, the millions of curies of radiation that are kept within those spent fuel pools.
Right. Now this map behind us, if you could explain to us, exactly what would happen if there was even a Chernobyl size, but now you're saying it could be even worse than Chernobyl because of this problem. What would happen? This goes all the way to Washington, D.C., for crying out loud. Is that how far-reaching the effect of this radiation could be?
Chernobyl was global. Chernobyl had an effect beyond Western Europe. It had an effect that scientists have measured in this country. It affected the entire globe and is continuing to affect the globe because there's radiation still associated with it and will be for all of our lifetimes, certainly. This is a schematic diagram that puts various concentric circles around ground zero, which is Millstone, to show where the highest deaths occurred and what the impacts were there, so that over here we could understand what the effects could be from a similar accident.
What, for instance, I can understand the longer-term effects of something like this, but the immediate effects. What type of evacuation remedies do we have, or what type of what do we have to prevent something like this if it does happen, or to at least contain it? Is there anything at all that can contain this kind of a disaster?
Absolutely not. I mean, once the Chernobyl accident took place, there was nothing to contain it at all. And as far as evacuation, the plant operators at Chernobyl didn't understand right away what had happened, and when they were given information about what was going on, they didn't believe it because it was too preposterous. As far as the government being in a position to notify the public about what to do, we're in a very sorry state about that. After the 3 Mile Island accident near Meltdown in 1979 in Pennsylvania, there was so much concern about the panic that occurred on the part of people who were living nearby and also far away as to what to do, because there was no guidance from the government. The reactor operators at first denied a problem, and the government began releasing information which, in retrospect, wasn't the complete story. And there was a lot of concern about where the plume was going and what people needed to do to avoid the effects. After that accident, the NRC was under a great deal of pressure to do something so that the public would accept the continued viability of nuclear reactors in the event of an accident. And one thing that the NRC required...
what did they do to do this? Yeah.
Well, one thing that they required was that they knew that the public didn't completely trust the utilities to report problems right away, completely and honestly. So the NRC took it upon itself to install radiation monitors around each nuclear reactor site in the country, so that the public would know that at least they could go look to the government. For instance, if there were to be a terrible accident and there were a radiation release, the radiation monitors that the government had set up presumably would provide the information to enable the government to tell the population what to do, what areas needed to be evacuated. Well, these monitors were in place for a period of time. However, under pressure from the utilities, the NRC a couple of years ago discontinued the program, and they've taken down their monitors. So at the present time, there are no monitors by the NRC that are monitored around the nuclear reactors.
Why was this allowed? I mean, what kind of pressure did they yield on? Did they wait to? Who did they pressure? I mean, what was their defense for this?
Well, it wasn't unopposed. Many governmental agencies around the country wrote letters and protested. One of the interesting and unique aspects of nuclear power regulation is that, unlike other governmental agencies that are taxpayer funded, the NRC is principally funded by the licensees. Each licensee is assessed a certain bill every year, and that's what principally funds the work and the staff of the NRC.
So they're not accountable to the people, they're more accountable to the utilities.
Well, there's a level of
Wait,
accountability
that's-
where the NRC presents a budget to Congress. Congress has to approve the budget, but then the money comes in from the utilities. And there was sufficient pressure applied by the utilities to discontinue this program that counterweighed the pressure that was coming in from the local agencies.
Now, since this warning, these warning devices have been taken down, have you seen an increase in radioactivity output in those areas? Has anybody been monitoring at all these areas?
Well,
to some degree.
I can't speak for everyone, but in the state of Connecticut, for instance, there's virtually no monitoring that is undertaken by the state of Connecticut or by the NRC. And to the extent that they do have monitoring, they have a minimal amount, that really, there's no independent monitoring of the monitoring that's undertaken by the utility, by Millstone.
Yeah.
And there's a process that's underway in Connecticut which involves the sale of the reactors from Northeast Utilities, which owned and operated them, to a company based in Virginia. And during this whole process of sale, there has been a systematic effort to obtain waivers to all kinds of standards and license conditions that have been in place for a long time. And there's been an effort on the part of Northeast Utilities to obtain waivers to make it more economical and more efficient from their standpoint to run the reactors. And these efficiencies have in several cases gone to the question of radiation monitoring. In fact, one of the campaigns that the Connecticut Coalition Against Millstone is involved in, along with an organization on Long Island called the STAR Foundation, that stands for Standing for Truth About Radiation, we've intervened in proceedings seeking to challenge the efforts of Millstone to change its radiation monitoring. And they want to change it so that they can, we believe, reduce their standards, reduce surveillance, and alter the kinds of instrumentation that they do so that they won't be on top of what radiation is being allowed.
Nancy.